The chess piece trembled between Marcus Chen's calloused fingers, a white knight suspended in the air above the... Before we dive into this incredible chess match that changed everything, this story will take just 3 minutes of your time, but could inspire you for years. If you enjoy stories about second chances and unexpected love, please hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Across from him, 12-year-old Emma Whitmore sat with the poise of someone who had never lost at anything that mattered, her green eyes calculating moves 3 turns ahead, while her manicured nails drummed against the mahogany table of the Riverside Community Center. "You're thinking too hard, Mr. Chen," Emma said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone raised in boardrooms and country clubs. Chess isn't about overthinking. It's about seeing patterns where others see chaos. Marcus set the knight down with a soft click, completing a move that he already knew was wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor, where folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows for the weekly chess club meeting. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial cleaning solution hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the expensive perfume that seemed to follow Emma wherever she went. "Easy for you to say," Marcus replied, studying the board with the same intensity he once reserved for architectural blueprints. "Some of us didn't grow up with chess masters for tutors." Emma's laugh was musical, but there was something underneath it, a loneliness that reminded Marcus of his own daughter's voice when she talked about the kids at her new school. "Tutors don't teach you everything, Mr. Chen. They can't teach you why someone plays the moves they do." The community center had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing decades of different color schemes underneath like geological layers. The basketball hoops at the far end of the room had nets that hung in tatters, and the stage where local theater groups once performed now served as storage for stacked chairs and forgotten props. But for 2 hours every Thursday evening, this forgotten corner of the city transformed into something magical, a place where a construction foreman could sit across from a CEO's daughter and pretend that the outside world didn't exist. 3 months ago, Marcus walked past the community center and saw the chessboards. Something called to him, in front of the entire crew for a mistake that wasn't even his, and the humiliation had settled in his chest like a stone. Through the smudged windows, he had seen the chessboards, the quiet concentration of the players, and something about the scene had called to him. He hadn't played chess since college, hadn't thought about strategy and patience and the slow, methodical process of building toward victory. But that night, watching strangers move pieces across worn boards, he remembered what it felt like to use his mind instead of just his hands. The chess club was an eclectic mix of characters who had washed up on the shores of this forgotten place. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired teacher who played with the fierce determination of someone who had spent 40 years trying to get teenagers to care about literature. Her weathered hands moved pieces with surgical precision, and she had a habit of humming old boleros under her breath when she was winning. Then there was David Kim, a college student who worked nights at a convenience store and used chess as an escape from textbooks and customer complaints. His style was aggressive, impatient, full of sacrificial gambits that either won spectacularly or failed catastrophically. But Emma Whitmore was different from all of them. She arrived each week in a different luxury car, sometimes a sleek BMW, other times a pristine Mercedes, driven by various assistants or family friends. She would emerge from these vehicles like a small empress, her school uniform perfectly pressed, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. The other players treated her with a mixture of respect and bewilderment, unsure how to interact with someone who carried herself like she owned the world but was still young enough to order from the kids' menu. "Your move, Mr. Chen," Emma said, pulling him back to the present moment. Marcus looked down at the board and felt his heart sink. In the time he had spent lost in thought, Emma had quietly dismantled his defense. Her bishops controlled the long diagonals, her rooks had doubled on the open file, and her queen lurked behind the pawn structure like a predator waiting to strike. He was 3 moves away from checkmate, and they both knew it. "How do you do it?" he asked, not bothering to hide his admiration. "You're 12 years old and you play like you've been doing this your whole life." Emma's expression shifted, and for a moment, the mask of confidence slipped. "I have been doing this my whole life," she said quietly. "My mom taught me when I was 4. She said chess was like life. You have to think ahead. protect what matters, and sometimes sacrifice what you love to win. Smart woman, Marcus said, moving his king to delay the inevitable. She was. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. She died when I was 8. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke, heavy and unavoidable. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Recognition flowing between two people who understood loss in ways they wished they didn't. He thought of his own wife, Sarah, taken by cancer when their daughter Lily was just 6. The way grief had transformed their small apartment into a museum of memories, every photograph and piece of clothing a reminder of what could never be recovered. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he meant it in a way that went deeper than politeness. Emma nodded, her fingers absently adjusting the position of her queen. "Dad tries, but he doesn't understand chess. He doesn't understand a lot of things, actually. He thinks money can fix everything. That if he just works hard enough and makes enough deals, somehow everything will go back to the way it was." Marcus recognized the frustration in her voice. It was the same tone Lily used when she talked about the kids at school who didn't understand why her mom wasn't at the parent-teacher conferences, why Marcus had to work late so often, why their dinner came from takeout containers more nights than not. "Checkmate," Emma said, moving her queen to the final square. Marcus stared at the board, seeing the elegant trap that had been building for the last 10 moves. "You're incredible," he said, and he wasn't just talking about chess. Emma smiled, but it was complicated, proud and sad, and something else that Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you single?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Around them, the chess club continued its quiet activities. Mrs. Rodriguez explaining a complex endgame to David Kim, two teenagers arguing over whether a move constituted a stalemate, the elderly Mr. Patterson setting up pieces for a problem he had discovered in a chess magazine. The normalcy of the scene made Emma's question feel even more surreal. "Why do you ask?" Marcus said carefully. Emma began resetting the pieces with methodical precision, each pawn returning to its starting square with a soft click. "Because my dad is lonely. And he doesn't even know it. He comes home from the office at 10 o'clock, eats dinner by himself while reading financial reports, and then goes to sleep in a king-size bed that's way too big for one person. On weekends, he takes me to expensive restaurants where we sit across from each other and pretend we're having conversations, but really he's just checking his phone and I'm just counting the minutes until we can go home." Marcus felt something tighten in his throat. The picture Emma painted was familiar in ways that made him uncomfortable. The single parent trying to fill roles they were never meant to fill alone, the awkward dinner conversations, the sense that love wasn't enough to bridge the gaps that loss had created. "Emma," he said gently, "I'm sure your father loves you very much." "Oh, he does," Emma said quickly. "That's not the problem. The problem is that he doesn't know how to be happy anymore. He's forgotten what it looks like when two adults care about each other, forgotten what it sounds like when people laugh together instead of just being polite." She paused, her green eyes meeting Marcus's with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "But you remember, don't you, Mr. Chen? You remember what it was like to be married to someone who understood you." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. The conversation had ventured into territory that felt dangerous, intimate in ways that made him want to change the subject. But there was something about Emma's directness, her ability to cut through social conventions and speak to the heart of things, that made him want to answer honestly. "Yes," he said simply, "I remember." Emma smiled, and this time it was uncomplicated. Pure satisfaction, like a chess player who had just seen their opponent fall into a carefully prepared trap. "Good. Because I have a proposition for you, Mr. Chen, a challenge, if you will." "I'm listening." Emma reached into her designer backpack and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table with the same deliberate movement she had used to deliver checkmate. The card was thick, expensive stock, with elegant typography that announced, "Victoria Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, Whitmore Holdings." "That's my mom," Emma said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "Well, my stepmother, technically, but she's been more of a real mother to me than anyone since my biological mom died. She married my dad 2 years ago and she's complicated." Marcus picked up the business card, feeling the weight of it between his fingers. The address was in the financial district, the kind of building where he occasionally did construction work but would never be invited as a guest. She's brilliant, Emma continued, and beautiful, and incredibly lonely. She's 35, which I know because I overheard her arguing with her personal trainer about whether 35 was too old to start taking tango lessons. She speaks 4 languages, has a master's degree from Wharton, and can make grown men cry in business negotiations. But she doesn't know how to be happy either. Emma, where is this going? The girl leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I want you to meet her. I want you to see if maybe, just maybe, 2 people who remember what love looks like might be able to find it again. Marcus felt the ground shifting underneath him, the safe predictability of his weekly chess games suddenly replaced by something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Emma, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but… Beat me, Emma interrupted, her voice cutting through his objections with surgical precision. Beat me in chess, and I'll arrange for you to meet her. Not as a setup, not as a blind date, but as… let's call it a business meeting. She's been looking for someone to oversee a renovation project at one of her properties. Someone with construction experience who understands architecture, who can see the potential in something that looks broken. Marcus stared at her, understanding dawning like sunrise over a battlefield. And if I can't beat you? Emma's smile was mysterious, complex, full of secrets that a 12-year-old shouldn't possess. Then we keep playing chess every Thursday night, and I keep watching my parents pretend they're not both dying of loneliness. The challenge hung between them, like a gauntlet thrown down in an ancient courtroom. Around them, the chess club continued its quiet business, unaware that something fundamental had just shifted in the universe. Mrs. Rodriguez was explaining a knight fork to David Kim, her weathered hands moving pieces across the board with the patience of someone who had spent decades teaching reluctant students. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh shadows across worn linoleum and forgotten dreams. Marcus looked down at the business card in his hands, feeling the weight of possibility and terror in equal measure. Victoria Whitmore. The name sounded like money and power and complications that he wasn't sure he was ready to handle. But underneath his fear was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or hope, or the faint memory of what it felt like to believe that the future could be different from the past. One game? He asked. One game, Emma confirmed. But not tonight. I want you to go home and practice. I want you to study chess theory. Learn some opening principles. Maybe even buy a tactics book. Because, Mr. Chen, if I'm going to lose to you, and that's a big if, I want to lose to your best effort, not to luck or accident. Marcus felt a laugh building in his chest, the first genuine laugh he'd experienced in months. You're giving me time to get better so you can beat me more impressively? I'm giving you time to get better so that when I do beat you, you'll know you gave everything you had. Emma's expression was serious, almost solemn. Because that's what my biological mother taught me about chess, Mr. Chen. It's not about winning or losing. It's about respecting your opponent enough to bring your absolute best to the board. She stood up, slinging her expensive backpack over her shoulder with practiced ease. Same time next week? Same time next week, Marcus agreed, watching as she walked toward the exit where a black sedan was already waiting. At the door, Emma turned back, her ponytail catching the fluorescent light. Mr. Chen, one more thing. Yes? Don't tell anyone about our arrangement. Not the other players, not your daughter, not anyone. This stays between us until the game is finished. Why? Emma's smile was enigmatic, ancient wisdom in a 12-year-old's face. Because the best chess games are played in secret, where the only witnesses are the pieces and the players who move them. And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with a business card, a challenge, and the first spark of something that felt dangerously close to hope. The community center felt different after Emma left, as if her absence had changed the molecular structure of the air itself. Marcus sat for a long time, staring at the chessboard where the pieces remained in their final positions. His king trapped, her queen triumphant, the inevitable conclusion written in the arrangement of wood and felt. Mrs. Rodriguez approached his table, her weathered face creased with concern. Everything all right, Marcus? You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus looked up at her, this woman who had become something like a friend over the past few months, who had patiently taught him the names of chess openings and the importance of controlling the center squares. Mrs. Rodriguez, can I ask you something? Of course, Mijo. Do you believe in second chances? Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out the chair that Emma had vacated, settling herself with the careful movements of someone whose bones remembered decades of standing in front of blackboards and chasing after reluctant students. "I've been married to the same man for 43 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. "We've had first chances, second chances, third chances, and more chances than I can count. Every morning when we wake up, every argument we survive, every moment when we choose to love each other instead of walking away. That's a chance, Marcus. The question isn't whether you believe in them, the question is whether you're brave enough to take them." Marcus nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of Victoria Whitmore's business card. "What if you're not sure you deserve them?" "Aye, Marcus," Mrs. Rodriguez said, reaching across the table to pat his hand with maternal gentleness. "Nobody deserves chances. That's what makes them so precious. They're not earned or bought or negotiated. They're given, freely and without conditions, by people who believe in possibilities that we can't see ourselves." She stood up, gathering her purse and chess set with practiced efficiency. "Whatever that little girl said to you tonight, whatever she offered or promised or challenged you to do, just remember that sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones who have the least reason to care about us at all." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Marcus sat alone in the community center as the custodian began his evening routine of stacking chairs and sweeping floors. The chess pieces remained on the table like silent witnesses to a conversation that had changed everything and nothing simultaneously. He thought about Emma's challenge, about the impossibility of beating someone who played chess like she was conducting a symphony, about the business card that felt like a passport to a world he wasn't sure he belonged in. But more than anything, he thought about Victoria Whitmore, a woman he had never met, whose face he couldn't imagine, whose voice he had never heard. A CEO with 4 languages and a Wharton degree, someone who could make grown men cry in business negotiations but didn't know how to be happy. The contradiction fascinated him, the idea that success and satisfaction were not synonymous, that power and peace existed in entirely different universes. Marcus folded the business card carefully and slipped it into his wallet. Next to a photograph of Sarah from their wedding day and a school picture of Lily with her gap-toothed smile. 3 women, 3 different relationships to love and loss and the infinite complexity of human connection. Sarah, who had taught him what devotion looked like in its purest form. Lily, who reminded him every day that love required presence and patience, and the willingness to fail spectacularly at being everything someone needed. And now, Victoria, a stranger who represented possibility and terror in equal measure. The custodian was mopping near his table now, the smell of industrial cleaner sharp and astringent. Marcus gathered his things and headed for the parking lot, where his 10-year-old Honda waited among the handful of cars that belonged to people who had nowhere more important to be on a Thursday night. Driving home through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, Marcus found himself thinking about chess strategy for the first time in years. He remembered his college chess club, the hours spent studying famous games and memorizing opening variations. The French defense, the Sicilian dragon, the Queen's gambit. Names that had once felt like incantations, magical phrases that could unlock the secrets of 64 squares. He thought about Emma's playing style, the way she built attacks like an architect designing a cathedral, every piece in perfect harmony, every move serving multiple purposes, beauty and function united in service of victory. To beat her, he would need to become someone different, someone who could think 5 moves ahead, while simultaneously keeping track of 7 different tactical themes. It seemed impossible, like trying to learn a new language in a week, or memorizing a symphony overnight. But as Marcus pulled into his apartment complex, past the units where his neighbors lived their quiet lives behind drawn curtains and locked doors, he felt something stirring that he hadn't experienced in months. Not hope, exactly, but its cousin. The willingness to believe that impossible things sometimes happen to ordinary people who were brave enough to try. His apartment was dark when he entered, Lily already asleep in her bedroom with homework scattered across her desk and a half-finished art project taped to her wall. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter's peaceful face in the dim light that filtered through her window. She looked like Sarah when she slept, the same delicate features and stubborn chin, the same expression of absolute trust in the world's basic goodness. What would Sarah think about Emma's challenge? About the possibility of meeting someone new, of opening their carefully constructed life to the chaos that came with caring about another adult. Sarah had made him promise, in those final weeks when the cancer had reduced her voice to whispers, that he wouldn't spend the rest of his life alone. "Find someone who makes you laugh," she had said, her hand barely strong enough to squeeze his fingers. "Find someone who understands that love isn't a competition, that there's room in your heart for more than one story." Marcus closed Lily's door quietly and walked to the kitchen, where he made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the small table where he and his daughter ate most of their meals. The business card lay on the table between the salt and pepper shakers. Innocuous as a grocery receipt, but heavy with implications that made his hands tremble slightly. Victoria Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer. What kind of woman earned that title at 35? What kind of loneliness could exist in a life filled with board meetings and business negotiations, and the kind of power that made grown men cry? Emma had painted a picture of someone brilliant and isolated, successful and starving for connection, a mirror image perhaps of his own existence in reverse. Marcus pulled out his phone and Googled chess tactics books, scrolling through dozens of reviews and recommendations. Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess. The Complete Chess Course, by Fred Reinfeld. Tactics Time, by Tim Brennan. The names blurred together, but underneath his confusion was determination. The same feeling he got when facing a particularly challenging construction project, when the blueprints looked impossible, but experience whispered that there might be a way forward. He ordered 3 books with overnight shipping, maxing out his credit card but not caring about the financial consequences. If Emma wanted his best effort, she would get it. If Victoria Whitmore was worth meeting, she was worth the risk of failure and embarrassment, and all the ways that hope could transform into disappointment. But as Marcus finished his coffee and prepared for bed, he found himself thinking less about chess strategy and more about the look in Emma's eyes when she had spoken about her parents, the mixture of love and frustration and desperate hope that children carry when they realize that adults don't have all the answers after all. She was 12 years old and trying to architect happiness for people who had forgotten what it looked like, playing matchmaker with the same precision she brought to chess. The weight of her trust settled on his shoulders like a familiar burden. Emma believed he could beat her, believed he was worthy of meeting Victoria Whitmore, believed that love could bloom in the most unlikely places between the most incompatible people. Whether or not she was right remained to be seen, but Marcus fell asleep that night with the business card on his nightstand and the first genuine smile he had worn in months playing at the corners of his mouth. The chess books arrived at 7:30 the next morning, delivered by a cheerful postal worker who found Marcus already dressed for work and halfway through his second cup of coffee. Lily emerged from her bedroom in pajamas covered with cartoon unicorns, her dark hair sticking up at impossible angles and sleep still clouding her 8-year-old eyes. "What's all that, Dad?" she asked, settling at the kitchen table with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to navigate morning routines without much adult supervision. Marcus hefted the package, feeling the weight of his midnight decision translated into physical form. "Books," he said, which was technically true but entirely inadequate. "About what?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with the kind of innocent curiosity that could unravel carefully constructed lies. Marcus looked at his daughter, Sarah's eyes in his own stubborn face, intelligence and vulnerability mixed in proportions that never failed to catch him off guard, and felt the familiar weight of single parenthood settling on his shoulders. "Chess," he said finally. "I'm trying to get better at chess." Lily's face brightened with interest. "Like the game with the horses and castles?" "Mrs. Patterson at school showed us how the pieces move during rainy day recess." "Exactly like that." Marcus poured orange juice into Lily's favorite glass, the one with the faded Disney princesses that had survived countless trips through the dishwasher. "I play at the community center on Thursday nights, and there's this girl there who's much better than me." "How much better?" Marcus considered the question while spreading peanut butter on Lily's toast. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that someone their age plays chess like Mozart composed symphonies, with an instinctive understanding of harmony and structure that defied rational explanation?" "She's really good," he settled on. "Like, scary good, but I thought maybe if I studied and practiced, I might be able to give her a real game." Lily nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Mom always said you were stubborn like that." "She said when you decided you wanted to learn something, you'd stay up all night reading about it until you could do it better than people who'd been doing it their whole lives." The casual mention of Sarah hit Marcus like a physical blow, the way it always did when Lily spoke about her mother in present tense, as if death were just another room in the house where someone happened to be spending time. He busied himself packing Lily's lunch, focusing on the mechanical tasks of sandwich making and apple washing, to avoid the emotional complexity of grief that refused to follow any predictable timeline. "Dad." Lily's voice was softer now, more cautious. "Are you okay? You've been different lately." "Happier, maybe, but also like you're thinking about something that makes you nervous." Marcus paused, a juice box halfway into Lily's lunchbox. His daughter's emotional intelligence never ceased to amaze him, the way she could read his moods like weather patterns, adjusting her own behavior to accommodate storms she didn't fully understand. It was a skill born of necessity, the kind of premature wisdom that children of tragedy developed to navigate a world that had proven itself fundamentally unpredictable. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, which was both true and false in ways that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to untangle. "Just thinking about some new things, some changes that might be coming." "Good changes or scary changes?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, and the honesty felt both liberating and terrifying. "Maybe both." Lily finished her toast in thoughtful silence, her legs swinging from the kitchen chair in the unconscious rhythm of childhood. When she spoke again, her voice carried the kind of gravity that made Marcus remember she was Sarah's daughter in more ways than just physical appearance. "Mom used to say that scary changes were just good changes wearing disguises," Lily said, not looking at her father but focusing intently on folding her napkin into increasingly small squares. "She said brave people were just scared people who decided to do the right thing anyway." Marcus felt his chest tighten with the familiar mixture of pride and loss that accompanied moments when his daughter revealed depths that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Sarah's wisdom, filtered through the lens of childhood and delivered with the casual profundity that only 8-year-olds could manage. "Your mom was a smart lady," he said, kissing the top of Lily's head before gathering his work clothes and the package of chess books. "Dad?" Lily called as he headed toward the door. "When you beat that girl at chess, will you tell me about it?" Marcus turned back, struck by his daughter's casual confidence in his eventual success. "What makes you think I'm going to beat her?" Lily smiled, the gap-toothed grin that never failed to remind him why he got up every morning and went to work and tried to be the kind of father that someone like her deserved. "Because you're my dad," she said simply. "And my dad doesn't give up on things that matter." The construction site was a symphony of controlled chaos, 40 men and women working in perfect synchronization to transform an empty lot into something functional and beautiful. Marcus had been the site foreman for 3 years, long enough to understand the intricate choreography of concrete pours and steel installations, the careful timing that turned raw materials into structures that would outlast the people who built them. But today his concentration was fragmented, split between the immediate demands of construction management and the chess books tucked into his truck's glove compartment. During his lunch break, he found himself studying tactical patterns instead of eating the sandwich Lily had helped him pack, his attention absorbed by diagrams of forks and pins and skewers, the weapons that chess players use to dismantle their opponents' carefully constructed defenses. "You're distracted today, Chen," his supervisor observed, appearing at Marcus's shoulder with the silent approach that had earned him the nickname Ghost among the crew. "Everything all right at home?" Frank Morrison was a good boss and a better man. Someone who understood that construction work was more than just physical labor. It was craft and artistry, and the deep satisfaction that came from building things that mattered. He had promoted Marcus to foreman based on technical skill and leadership ability, but also because he recognized something in the younger man that reminded him of his own journey from laborer to manager. "Everything's fine, Frank," Marcus replied, closing the chess book and reaching for his untouched sandwich. "Just got some studying to do in my spare time." Frank's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Studying? You thinking about going back to school, getting that architecture degree you used to talk about?" The question touched on old dreams, ambitions that Marcus had set aside when Sarah got sick, and medical bills became more important than educational aspirations. For 2 years in college, he had studied architecture with the passionate intensity of someone who understood that buildings were more than just shelter. They were statements about human possibility, expressions of hope translated into steel and stone and glass. Nothing that ambitious, Marcus said, though even as he spoke the words he could feel something stirring in his chest, not quite hope, but its younger cousin, curiosity. "Just learning some new skills." Frank nodded, but his expression suggested he was filing the conversation away for future reference. "Well, whatever it is, don't let it interfere with the job. We've got that inspection next week and I need you sharp." "You've got it, boss." The afternoon passed in a blur of technical problems and logistical challenges that demanded Marcus's full attention. A concrete delivery was delayed, throwing off the carefully choreographed schedule for the foundation pour. The electrical contractor discovered a conflict with the plumbing rough-in that required immediate consultation with the project architect. A new safety inspector arrived with a clipboard and an attitude, determined to find violations that would justify his existence. Marcus handled each crisis with the calm competence that had earned him his reputation, but underneath his professional composure, chess patterns flickered through his consciousness like subliminal messages. Knight forks, queen sacrifices, the delicate balance between attack and defense that separated masters from amateurs. During the drive home, Marcus found himself taking a detour through the financial district, past the gleaming towers where people like Emma Whitmore made decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever getting concrete dust under their fingernails. The Whitmore Holdings building was a monument to success, 30 stories of glass and steel that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back in brilliant, blinding sheets. Marcus parked across the street and stared up at the structure, trying to imagine what kind of person could command such a fortress of commerce and power. Emma had described her stepmother as brilliant and beautiful and lonely, but those words felt inadequate when faced with the physical reality of the world Victoria inhabited. What did loneliness look like when you could afford anything money could buy? What did isolation feel like when you were surrounded by assistants and advisors and people whose livelihoods depended on your satisfaction? A woman in an expensive suit emerged from the building's revolving door, her heels clicking against the marble plaza with metronome precision. For a moment, Marcus wondered if this might be Victoria. The confident stride, the designer handbag, the air of someone accustomed to deference and attention. But the woman was too young, too obviously eager to please the older man who accompanied her. Someone trying to climb the corporate ladder rather than someone who had already reached its highest rungs. Marcus drove home with more questions than answers, his imagination constructing elaborate fantasies about a woman he had never met, based on nothing more than a business card and a 12-year-old's perspective on adult loneliness. By the time he reached his apartment complex, he had decided that Emma's challenge was impossible, that the gulf between his world and Victoria Whitmore's was too vast to bridge with something as simple as chess strategy. But that night, after Lily had finished her homework and they had shared dinner while watching a nature documentary about penguins, Marcus found himself at the kitchen table with the chess books spread before him like battle plans. The first book, Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, opened with a quote that stopped him cold: "Chess is mental torture." Mental torture. The phrase echoed in his mind as he worked through basic tactical exercises, his brain struggling to process patterns that Emma probably absorbed as effortlessly as breathing. Fork the king and queen. Pin the rook to the bishop. Create discovered attacks that forced impossible choices between equally valuable pieces. The learning curve was brutal, each concept building on the previous one, with mathematical precision that brooked no shortcuts or casual understanding. Marcus had always been good with his hands, excellent at visualizing three-dimensional problems and finding practical solutions to construction challenges. But chess demanded a different kind of intelligence, abstract reasoning and pattern recognition, and the ability to calculate consequences that rippled forward through time like stones thrown into still water. By midnight, Marcus had worked through 30 tactical problems and gotten perhaps half of them correct on his first attempt. His head ached with the effort of forcing his brain into unfamiliar channels, and his eyes burned from staring at small diagrams under inadequate kitchen lighting. But underneath the physical discomfort was something else, the addictive satisfaction of puzzles solved and patterns understood, the same feeling he got when a complex construction problem suddenly revealed its elegant solution. He was closing the first book when his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, I hope you're studying hard. See you Thursday. Emma." Somehow she had gotten his number, though Marcus couldn't remember giving it to her. The message was brief but loaded with implications, surveillance and expectation, and the gentle pressure of someone who never doubted her ability to orchestrate the lives of others. Marcus typed back, "Working on it. No promises, though." The response came immediately. "I never make promises I can't keep, Mr. Chen. I suggest you do the same." And then silence, leaving Marcus alone in his kitchen with chess books and empty coffee cups, and the growing certainty that he had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple game challenge. The next morning brought the familiar routine of breakfast and lunch packing, and the careful choreography of getting an 8-year-old ready for school without losing patience or forgetting essential items. But underneath the domestic normalcy, Marcus felt a subtle shift in his perspective, as if the world had been rotated a few degrees and everything looked slightly different from what he remembered. Lily noticed, of course. Children were remarkably sensitive to changes in their parents' emotional weather, and Marcus's daughter had been reading his moods with professional accuracy, since Sarah's death had forced her to become more perceptive than any 8-year-old should need to be. "You're thinking about that chess girl again," Lily observed over her bowl of cereal, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact certainty of someone stating an obvious truth. "What makes you say that?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure why he bothered pretending. Lily could see through his deflections with X-ray clarity. "You get this look," she explained, stirring her cereal with scientific precision, "like you're trying to solve a math problem that doesn't have a right answer. Mom used to get the same look when she was thinking about how to help kids at school who were having problems at home." The comparison to Sarah caught Marcus off guard, not because it was inaccurate, but because it was so perfectly precise. Sarah had always been drawn to complicated people with complicated problems, convinced that the right combination of patience and insight could unlock solutions that others had given up on. She had been a social worker before Lily was born, spending her days in courtrooms and foster homes and crisis centers, fighting battles for children who had no other advocates. "Your mom was good at helping people," Marcus said carefully, "but this is different. This is just a game." Lily fixed him with a look that was pure Sarah, skeptical and knowing and entirely too wise for someone who still believed in the tooth fairy. "Dad, you bought 3 books about chess and stayed up until midnight reading them. That's not just a game behavior. That's this really matters to me behavior." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, caught between admiration for his daughter's perceptiveness and frustration at being so transparent. "Okay, maybe it matters a little, but not in the way you're thinking." "What way am I thinking?" The question was innocent enough, but Marcus could see the trap lurking underneath it. 8-year-olds were natural philosophers, capable of asking questions that adult minds spent years trying to answer. If he said too much, he would be forced to explain Emma's challenge and the mysterious Victoria Whitmore, and all the complicated adult emotions that he hadn't fully sorted out himself. If he said too little, Lily would fill in the blanks with her own theories, which might be even more dangerous than the truth. "I think you're wondering if this has something to do with meeting new people," Marcus said diplomatically, "and maybe wondering if those new people might change things around here." Lily nodded slowly, her expression serious in the way that children got when they sensed they were approaching important conversational territory. "Would that be bad? If things changed, I mean." The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it forced him to confront fears he had been carrying for 2 years without examining them too closely. What if he did meet someone? What if Emma's impossible challenge somehow led to something real and complicated and life-altering? What if bringing another adult into their carefully constructed world disrupted the delicate balance that he and Lily had worked so hard to achieve? But looking at his daughter's face, hopeful and scared and trusting in equal measure, Marcus realized that his fears might be selfish, that his desire to preserve the status quo might be robbing Lily of possibilities she was too young to even imagine. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "Change is scary because you never know how things will turn out. But sometimes staying the same is scarier than changing, because it means missing out on things that could be really wonderful." Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing constitutional law. "Mom used to say that families weren't like recipes," she said finally. "She said you couldn't mess them up by adding new ingredients, as long as the love was still the most important part." Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears that he quickly blinked away. Sarah's wisdom, delivered with the casual profundity that only children could manage, cutting straight to the heart of every complicated emotion he had been wrestling with since Emma had slid that business card across the chess table. "Your mom was right about a lot of things," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "So you're gonna beat the chess girl?" Marcus looked at his daughter, Sarah's eyes and his own stubborn chin, intelligence and vulnerability mixed in proportions that never failed to take his breath away, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The willingness to believe that impossible things sometimes happen to ordinary people who were brave enough to try. "I'm going to give it my best shot," he said. Lily smiled, the gap-toothed grin that was equal parts Sarah's warmth and Marcus's determination. Good, because I think Mom would want you to try. The work week passed in a blur of chess study and construction challenges, each day bringing new tactical concepts and increasingly complex positional understanding. Marcus found himself thinking in chess terms during concrete pours and steel installations, his mind automatically calculating piece values and evaluating pawn structures, even while his hands guided heavy machinery and coordinated work crews. The chess books had become his constant companions, traveling with him to the construction site and emerging during every break and lunch period. His co-workers noticed the change, but respected his privacy, understanding that everyone needed hobbies and obsessions to balance the physical demands of construction work. Chen's got himself a new girlfriend, one of the younger guys joked during Thursday morning coffee break, gesturing toward the chess book that Marcus was studying with monastic intensity. Bobby Fischer, another worker, chimed in, reading the cover over Marcus's shoulder. Didn't that guy go crazy? Most chess players do, eventually, Frank Morrison observed, settling onto the makeshift bench that the crew had constructed from leftover lumber. It's all that thinking without moving, all that strategy without action, drives a man to distraction if he's not careful. Marcus looked up from a particularly complex endgame position, meeting his supervisor's concerned gaze. You worried about me, Frank? Worried? No curious? Absolutely. Frank pulled out his own lunch, a sandwich that his wife had packed with the same methodical care that marked all of her domestic efforts. In 3 years, I've never seen you obsess over anything that wasn't directly related to work or your daughter. Now suddenly you're studying chess like it's the secret to eternal happiness. Maybe it is, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure he was joking. Frank laughed, but his expression remained thoughtful. You know, my grandfather used to play chess. Taught me the moves when I was maybe 10 years old, though I never had the patience for it. He used to say that chess was like life in miniature. Every game was a story about choices and consequences, about the price of ambition and the cost of mistakes. Sounds like a wise man. He was. He also used to say that the most dangerous players weren't the ones who studied theory and memorized openings. The most dangerous players were the ones who understood that chess was really about understanding people, their fears, their desires, their blind spots, and hidden weaknesses. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you trying to tell me, Frank? I'm trying to tell you to be careful, son. Whatever game you're preparing for, whoever you're preparing to play, just remember that sometimes the stakes are higher than they appear on the surface. That evening, Marcus arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, hoping to get some practice time before Emma arrived with her expensive clothes and ruthless precision. The building was mostly empty, just the custodian mopping floors and a few senior citizens using the walking track that circled the main gymnasium. Marcus set up a chessboard at his usual table and began working through tactical exercises, his concentration so complete that he didn't notice Mrs. Rodriguez until she cleared her throat softly. You're early tonight, Marcus, she observed, settling into the chair across from him with the careful movements of someone whose joints remembered decades of standing in front of blackboards. Trying to get some extra practice, Marcus replied, not looking up from the position he was analyzing. There's this girl who's been beating me consistently, and I thought maybe. Emma Whitmore, Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted, her voice carrying a note of warning that made Marcus look up sharply. You know her? Mrs. Rodriguez's weathered face creased into an expression that was equal parts affection and concern. I've been coming to this chess club for 8 years, Marcus. I've watched that little girl grow up, watched her move pieces like she was born understanding the game. But more than that, I've watched her study people the same way she studies chess positions, looking for weaknesses, searching for the moves that will give her exactly what she wants. Marcus felt his chest tighten with something that might have been alarm. What are you saying? I'm saying that Emma Whitmore is 12 years old going on 40, and she's been through more loss and disappointment than most adults ever face. Her biological mother died of cancer when Emma was 8. Her father married Victoria 6 months later. Too soon, if you ask me, but grief makes people do strange things. Emma's been trying to manage everyone else's happiness ever since, like she thinks she can prevent more loss by controlling all the variables. Mrs. Rodriguez reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over Marcus's, her touch gentle but firm. She's a good girl, Marcus, but she's also a master manipulator. Not maliciously, she genuinely believes she's helping people find what they need. But she's 12 years old, and 12-year-olds don't always understand the full consequences of their schemes. Mrs. Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but let me finish, Micho. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 40 years getting teenagers to listen when they didn't want to. Victoria Whitmore is a beautiful, brilliant, complicated woman who's been hurt more than she lets anyone see. She married Emma's father because she thought she could build a family through pure determination and good intentions. But you can't force love to grow in soil that hasn't been properly prepared, and both of them are still grieving losses they've never fully acknowledged. Marcus stared at the older woman, feeling the ground shift underneath him as information he hadn't possessed rearranged his understanding of Emma's challenge. How do you know all this? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. Because Victoria comes here sometimes, late at night when she thinks no one will recognize her. She sits in her car in the parking lot and watches Emma play chess. And the look on her face. She shook her head slowly. It's the look of someone who wants to belong somewhere, but doesn't know how to ask for permission. Before Marcus could respond, the community center's main door opened with a soft chime, and Emma Whitmore entered like a small empress claiming her territory. She wore a different, expensive outfit, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week, but her expression was the same mixture of confidence and calculation that had fascinated and intimidated him from their first meeting. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chen, Emma said, nodding to each of them with formal politeness. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, gathering her purse and chess set with practiced efficiency. Not at all, dear. I was just leaving. She paused beside Emma's chair, her weathered hand briefly touching the girl's shoulder with maternal gentleness. Be careful, Mija. Sometimes the games we play have consequences we don't expect. Emma's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable and uncertain underneath her polished exterior. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the familiar mask of confident control. Ready for our rematch, Mr. Chen? She asked, beginning to set up pieces with mechanical precision. Marcus looked at this 12-year-old, who had somehow become the architect of his potential future. This child who was trying to orchestrate adult happiness with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to chess. Mrs. Rodriguez's warnings echoed in his mind, but underneath his caution was something else. Curiosity about Victoria Whitmore, about the woman who sat in parking lots watching her stepdaughter play chess, about the kind of loneliness that could exist in a life filled with power and success. I'm ready, he said, though he wasn't sure he was talking about chess anymore. Emma smiled, her green eyes bright with anticipation. Good, because tonight, Mr. Chen, we're playing for keeps. The first few moves developed according to classical principles. Knights before bishops, control the center, castle early for king's safety. But Marcus could sense something different in Emma's play tonight, a subtle aggressiveness that hadn't been present in their previous games. She was pushing for complications, creating tactical opportunities that would test his newly acquired knowledge. You've been studying, Emma observed, her voice carrying a note of approval. I can see it in your move selection, less random, more purposeful. 3 books and about 20 hours of tactics problems, Marcus admitted, developing his pieces with more confidence than he had felt in previous games. Good. I was worried you might not take this seriously. Emma's queen emerged from the back rank like a predator entering a savanna, immediately creating multiple threats that forced Marcus to calculate carefully. Oh, I'm taking it seriously, Marcus said, finding a defensive move that neutralized her most immediate threats while improving his own position. The question is whether serious is going to be enough. Emma leaned back in her chair, studying the position with the intensity of someone reading a fascinating novel. You know, Mr. Chen, most adults underestimate children because they confuse innocence with ignorance. They think that because we haven't experienced certain things, we can't understand them. And you disagree? I disagree completely. Emma moved her bishop to a square that created a subtle but powerful pressure against Marcus's king side. Children are actually better at understanding emotional truth because we haven't learned to lie to ourselves yet. We see what adults refuse to acknowledge. That my father is desperately lonely, that Victoria is afraid of being abandoned again, that both of them are too proud and too scared to admit they need something they can't buy or negotiate for. Marcus studied the board, looking for the tactical blow he was certain Emma was preparing, but her words were more distracting than her pieces, forcing him to consider possibilities that extended far beyond the 64 squares in front of them. "And you think chess is going to solve all of that?" Emma's laugh was musical but complex, carrying notes of wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "I think chess is going to prove that you're someone worth Victoria's attention. Someone who understands that the most important battles are won through patience and planning, not through brute force or emotional manipulation." She moved her rook to the open file, creating a battery with her queen that suddenly made Marcus's position look precarious. But for the first time in their acquaintance, he saw the tactical blow coming and had prepared a counterblow of his own. Marcus moved his knight to a central square, creating a fork that attacked both Emma's queen and her undefended bishop. For a moment, Emma's composure slipped, genuine surprise flickering across her features before being quickly suppressed. "Very nice, Mr. Chen," she said, moving her queen to safety but losing the bishop in the process. "I didn't see that combination coming." "Sometimes the student surprises the teacher," Marcus replied, though his heart was racing with the realization that he had actually gained material against Emma Whitmore. "Sometimes," Emma agreed, but her tone suggested that surprises were temporary inconveniences rather than permanent setbacks. Marcus was about to make a move that would change 4 lives forever. But first, if you're enjoying this story of strategy and romance, take a quick second to like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances. A labyrinth of tactical themes and strategic concepts that pushed his understanding to its limits. Emma fought back with characteristic precision, using her positional advantages to create complications that threatened to overwhelm his ability to calculate accurately. But something had changed in Marcus's approach to the game. The hundreds of tactical exercises had created neural pathways that operated below the level of conscious thought, pattern recognition that allowed him to see combinations and defensive resources that would have been invisible to him just a week earlier. "You're playing differently tonight," Emma observed as they reached a complex endgame position. "More confidently, like you actually believe you can win." Marcus looked up from the board, meeting her green eyes with something that might have been determination. "Maybe I do believe it. Maybe studying theory and working tactical problems isn't just about chess. Maybe it's about learning to believe that you can become better than you were yesterday." Emma smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression, as if she envied the adult capacity for self-improvement and transformation. "That's a very grown-up way of looking at it, Mr. Chen." "Well, I am grown-up, even if I don't always feel like it." "None of us feel grown-up," Emma said quietly, advancing her passed pawn with methodical precision. "That's the secret adults don't want children to know, that everyone is just making it up as they go along, hoping their mistakes won't be too expensive and their successes won't be too accidental." The endgame required precise calculation, each move carrying consequences that rippled forward through multiple variations. Marcus found himself in unfamiliar territory. Not winning exactly, but not obviously losing either. The position was complex enough that even Emma seemed uncertain about the best plan forward. "Mr. Chen," Emma said during a long period of contemplation, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "Do you ever feel guilty about the possibility of being happy again?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, cutting straight to the heart of emotions he had been avoiding for 2 years. He looked at this 12-year-old, who somehow understood adult psychology better than most therapists. This child who had learned to read people's deepest fears and desires like chess positions. "Every day," he admitted, his voice rougher than he intended. Emma nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Victoria feels the same way. She married my father because she thought she could build happiness through effort and good intentions. But guilt is like quicksand. The harder you struggle against it, the deeper it pulls you down." She moved her king to support the passed pawn, creating a position that Marcus couldn't quite evaluate. "That's why tonight matters, Mr. Chen. Not because beating me at chess will prove anything about your worthiness or your intelligence. It matters because it will prove that you're capable of fighting for something that scares you, something that might change everything about the life you've carefully constructed." Marcus stared at the board, seeing not just pieces and squares, but the larger game that Emma had been orchestrating from the moment she had slid Victoria's business card across the table. This wasn't about chess at all. It was about courage and risk, and the willingness to believe that love could bloom in the most unlikely places between the most incompatible people. He moved his rook to the back rank, creating counterplay that forced Emma to choose between advancing her pawn and defending against his threats. For the first time in their games together, he sensed genuine uncertainty in her play, as if the position had moved beyond her calculated preparation into territory where pure chess ability would determine the outcome. "Interesting," Emma murmured, studying the position with newfound respect. "You're really making me work for this." "Good," Marcus said, feeling something that might have been confidence growing in his chest, "because I'm not going down without a fight." The final phase of the game stretched on for another hour, both players calculating with desperate precision as the position grew increasingly complex. Marcus found resources he didn't know he possessed, defensive concepts that seemed to emerge from some deep well of understanding that the tactical exercises had unlocked. When the end came, it came suddenly. Emma advanced her passed pawn to the 7th rank, threatening promotion, but Marcus had prepared a counterattack that forced her king into the open. His rook and knight worked together with devastating precision, creating a mating net that even Emma's considerable skill couldn't escape. "Checkmate," Marcus said quietly, hardly believing the words were coming from his mouth. Emma stared at the board for a long moment, her expression cycling through surprise, calculation, and finally, something that might have been relief. "Well played, Mr. Chen. Very well played indeed." She reached into her expensive backpack and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table with the same deliberate movement she had used to deliver checkmate in all their previous games. Victoria's contact information, her direct number, her private email, and the address of the property she wants renovated. It's a Victorian mansion in the historic district, beautiful bones, but it's been empty for 3 years and needs someone who understands both structural integrity and aesthetic vision. Marcus picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of possibility and terror in equal measure. "Emma, what if it doesn't work out?" Emma interrupted, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned to manage disappointment with professional efficiency. "What if you call her and she's not interested, or you meet her and there's no connection, or you try to build something together and it falls apart?" She began packing her chess set with practiced movements, each piece returning to its designated place in the wooden box. "Then, at least you'll know, Mr. Chen. At least you'll know that you were brave enough to try, that you didn't let fear make your choices for you." Marcus opened the envelope, seeing Victoria Whitmore's information written in Emma's precise handwriting. Phone number, email address, and below that a note. "Tell her Emma sent you. Tell her it's time." "Emma," Marcus said as she prepared to leave, "why me? Out of all the people in the world, why did you choose me for this?" The girl paused at the community center door, her hand on the handle and her expression thoughtful. "Because you understand loss without letting it make you bitter. Because you love your daughter enough to work 2 jobs and study chess until midnight when someone challenges you to be better than you are. And because when you look at people, you see their potential instead of their problems." She smiled, the mysterious expression that had fascinated Marcus from their first meeting. "But mostly because you remind me of my biological mother. Someone who believed that love was worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible." And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone in the community center with a chess set, an envelope, and the first genuine hope he had felt since Sarah's funeral. Marcus stared at Victoria Whitmore's contact information for 3 days before finding the courage to make the call. The envelope lived on his kitchen table like a loaded gun, innocuous in appearance but heavy with implications that made his hands tremble every time he considered picking up the phone. Lily noticed his distraction, of course, commenting with 8-year-old directness that he was, quote, "acting weird even for someone who stays up late reading chess books." The Victorian mansion stood at the corner of Elm and 3rd Street, a testament to architectural ambition from an era when wealthy families built homes like small palaces. 3 stories of ornate woodwork and stained glass windows, wrap-around porches and bay windows that caught the morning light and threw it back in brilliant prismatic displays. But the beauty was compromised by years of neglect. Peeling paint, sagging gutters, windows clouded with grime and neglect. Marcus had driven past the property twice before finally calling Victoria's direct number, his heart hammering with the irregular rhythm of someone attempting something that felt simultaneously inevitable and impossible. Her voice had been professional but warm, with an accent that suggested expensive education and international experience. "Emma mentioned you might call," Victoria had said, and Marcus could hear something like amusement in her tone. She's been remarkably persistent in her recommendations about this project. When can you meet me at the property? That conversation had led to this moment. Standing on the front porch of a house that represented either opportunity or disaster, waiting for a woman he had never met, but who had somehow become the focal point of hopes he hadn't known he was carrying. Victoria arrived in a silver Audi that whispered against the curb with German precision, her emergence from the driver's seat conducted with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being watched and evaluated. She was smaller than Marcus had imagined, perhaps 5'6" in heels that added authority to her already commanding presence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional chignon that emphasized the elegant lines of her neck and the intelligence in her brown eyes. "Mr. Chen?" she asked, extending a hand that was softer than he had expected but with a grip that suggested both strength and determination. "Victoria Whitmore. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." "Thank you for considering me for the project," Marcus replied, though they both knew this was about more than construction work. Victoria smiled, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. This was someone who understood complexity, who carried herself with the careful poise of someone who had learned to navigate treacherous waters without letting the effort show. "Emma speaks very highly of your chess playing," Victoria said, producing a set of keys from her designer handbag. "She says you're someone who understands strategy and patience." "Emma is unique," Marcus said diplomatically. Victoria's laugh was rueful but affectionate. That's one way to put it. "She's also relentlessly determined to manage everyone else's happiness, which I suppose is both admirable and exhausting." The front door opened with a creak that spoke of swollen wood and neglected hinges, revealing an interior that took Marcus's breath away. The foyer rose 2 stories, with a grand staircase that curved upward like something from a movie set. Original hardwood floors stretched in every direction, covered with decades of dust, but still beautiful underneath the neglect. Crown molding and wainscoting spoke of craftsmanship from an era when details mattered more than efficiency. "It's incredible," Marcus said, his architect's eye automatically cataloging the restoration work that would be required. "When was it built?" 1892, Victoria replied, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she moved deeper into the house. "It was owned by the same family for 90 years, then sat empty for another 20 before I bought it 3 years ago." "Why did you buy it if you weren't ready to renovate?" Victoria paused in the doorway to what had once been a formal dining room, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Because I couldn't stand the idea of it being torn down for condominiums. Because sometimes you fall in love with potential instead of reality, and you convince yourself that love is enough to overcome practical obstacles." The words hung between them, loaded with implications that extended far beyond real estate investment. Marcus understood that they were still talking about the house, but also about something else. The way people made decisions based on hope rather than logic. The way beauty could survive neglect if someone cared enough to fight for its restoration. They spent the next hour walking through rooms that had once hosted dinner parties and Christmas mornings and all the small domestic rituals that transformed houses into homes. Victoria proved to be knowledgeable about historical architecture, pointing out original fixtures and architectural details that had survived decades of abandonment. Her passion for the project was evident in every gesture, every comment about molding profiles and window configurations. "The structural work shouldn't be too complex," Marcus said, running his hand along a wall where water damage had compromised the plaster. "New roof, updated electrical and plumbing, refinishing the floors. The bones are solid. Whoever built this understood that craftsmanship was an investment in the future." How long would a full restoration take? Marcus considered the question, his mind automatically calculating timelines and material requirements. "Done right? 18 months, maybe 2 years. This isn't the kind of project you rush if you want to preserve the historical integrity." Victoria nodded, but her expression suggested she was thinking about more than construction schedules. "And you'd be willing to take on something this complex?" "It would require a significant time commitment, working closely with someone you barely know on a project that could easily become complicated." Marcus met her gaze, understanding that they had moved beyond discussing renovation work into territory that was far more personal and dangerous. "I've never backed down from a challenge that mattered," he said, "and I've never met a building that couldn't be saved if someone was willing to put in the work. Even buildings that have been neglected for years. Even buildings that other people have given up on." "Especially those buildings," Marcus said, his voice carrying conviction that surprised him. "Sometimes the ones that have been abandoned the longest, are the ones most worth saving. Victoria smiled, and this time there was something vulnerable in her expression, as if his words had touched on emotions she usually kept carefully controlled. "Emma was right about you," she said softly. "What did she tell you?" "That you see potential where other people see problems. That you understand the difference between broken and unfixable." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, expecting to see a work-related crisis or a message from Lily's school. Instead, he saw Emma's name and a message that made his blood run cold. "How's the meeting going? Remember, some games have more than 2 players." Marcus looked up to find Victoria watching him with curious concern. "Everything all right?" "I think so," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely certain. Emma's message carried an undertone of warning that he couldn't quite decipher, as if the 12-year-old puppet master was reminding him that her schemes operated on multiple levels simultaneously. "She's watching us, isn't she?" Victoria asked, her tone suggesting this was a statement rather than a question. "Emma?" Victoria nodded toward the front window, where a familiar figure sat in the passenger seat of a black sedan parked across the street. Even at this distance, Emma's blonde ponytail and expensive clothes were unmistakable. "She does this sometimes," Victoria said with weary affection. "Shows up at places where she thinks important conversations are happening. Like she's quality control for everyone else's emotional decisions." Marcus felt something that might have been irritation building in his chest. The meeting with Victoria had been going well, better than well, if he was being honest, and the idea that Emma was orchestrating events from the sidelines made him feel manipulated in ways that were both clever and deeply unsettling. "Should we go talk to her?" Marcus asked. "God, no," Victoria said quickly. "If we acknowledge that we know she's there, she'll take it as permission to become even more involved in whatever this is." She gestured between them, her hand describing a space that seemed charged with possibilities neither of them had quite articulated. "And what is this exactly?" Victoria's expression became careful, guarded in ways that suggested she had learned to protect herself from hope and disappointment in equal measure. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Emma arranged this meeting under the pretense of hiring you for renovation work, but I suspect her agenda is more complex than historical preservation." "She wants us to," Marcus began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence without presuming too much or too little. "She wants us to fall in love," Victoria said with the matter-of-fact directness of someone stating an obvious truth. "She's 12 years old and convinced that adult happiness can be orchestrated like a chess game, with the right moves leading inevitably to the desired outcome." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassment and attraction and confusion mixing in proportions that made it difficult to think clearly. "And how do you feel about that?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from the neglected grandeur of the dining room to the figure in the sedan across the street, then finally to Marcus's face. "I feel like I haven't been asked what I want in so long that I'm not sure I remember how to want things for myself." The admission hung between them like smoke, heavy and intimate and impossible to ignore. Marcus understood that they had crossed some invisible threshold, moved from polite conversation into territory where honesty was both dangerous and necessary. "What would you want," Marcus asked carefully, "if you could want anything?" Victoria's smile was complicated, carrying notes of sadness and hope and something that might have been longing. "I'd want to stop feeling like I'm performing happiness for everyone else's benefit. I'd want to have conversations that don't feel like negotiations. I'd want to wake up in the morning and look forward to the day instead of just surviving it." She paused, her voice becoming softer. "I'd want to fall in love with someone who sees me as more than just a collection of achievements and responsibilities." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, recognition flowing between two people who understood loneliness in ways they wished they didn't. "Victoria," he said, her name feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that has nothing to do with renovation work or Emma's schemes or anything except getting to know each other?" Victoria's smile was radiant, transforming her carefully composed features into something that took Marcus's breath away. "I thought you'd never ask." But their moment was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming and voices raised in what sounded like an argument. Through the dining room window, they could see Emma engaged in animated conversation with a man in an expensive suit, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that suggested boardrooms and power lunches and decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Richard," Victoria said, her voice carrying notes of resignation and barely suppressed irritation. "Emma's father, my husband." The word hit Marcus like a physical blow, rearranging his understanding of the situation with brutal efficiency. Victoria wasn't just Emma's stepmother. She was a married woman, someone else's wife, a person whose availability he had completely misunderstood. "Your husband," Marcus repeated, feeling the ground shift underneath him as hope transformed into something much more complicated and dangerous. "Yes," Victoria said quietly, her expression becoming guarded again, "though that's complicated right now." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the front door opened with a bang that echoed through the empty house. Richard Whitmore entered like a man accustomed to owning every space he occupied, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere from intimate to confrontational. "Victoria," Richard said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who rarely had his authority questioned. "Emma tells me you're interviewing contractors without consulting me." "Hello, Richard," Victoria replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm handling the renovation project we discussed. This is Marcus Chen, the contractor Emma recommended." Richard's gaze swept over Marcus with the dismissive efficiency of someone evaluating livestock, taking in his work clothes and calloused hands and the evidence of manual labor that marked him as fundamentally different from the world of finance and corporate power. "Mr. Chen," Richard said, his handshake brief and perfunctory, "I wasn't aware that my wife was taking contractor recommendations from my 12-year-old daughter." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, not just at Richard's obvious condescension, but at the way the man's presence seemed to diminish Victoria, transforming her from a confident professional into someone who had to justify her decisions to a disapproving authority figure. "Emma has excellent judgment," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge that made Richard's eyebrows rise. "She understands quality when she sees it." "Does she?" Richard's smile was sharp, predatory. "And what qualifies you to work on a property of this significance, Mr. Chen? Do you have experience with historical restoration, references from similar projects, insurance coverage adequate for $1 million renovation?" Marcus felt his jaw clench, understanding that Richard was using professional questions as weapons in a territorial dispute that had nothing to do with construction qualifications. "I've been in construction for 15 years, he said evenly. "I studied architecture in college before life took me in a different direction. I understand both the technical and aesthetic challenges of historical preservation." "Life took you in a different direction," Richard repeated, his tone suggesting that this phrase revealed fundamental character flaws. "And what direction was that, exactly?" "Richard," Victoria said, her voice carrying a warning that her husband ignored completely. "I'm simply trying to understand Mr. Chen's qualifications," Richard continued, his gaze never leaving Marcus's face. "After all, this property represents a significant investment, and I want to ensure we're working with someone who can deliver results commensurate with our expectations." Marcus understood that they were no longer talking about construction work. This was about territory and ownership, and the ways that powerful men marked their domains by diminishing potential threats. But underneath his anger was something else. Clarity about the situation he had stumbled into, understanding that Victoria's marriage was far more complicated than Emma's matchmaking schemes had suggested. "My qualifications speak for themselves," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "But I'm beginning to wonder if this project is the right fit for my company." Richard's smile widened, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Perhaps not. Perhaps it would be better for everyone involved if we found a contractor with more appropriate credentials." "Stop it," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the masculine tension with surgical precision. "Both of you just stop it right now." She turned to face her husband, her carefully composed mask slipping to reveal anger that had been building for months or maybe years. "Richard, you have no right to come here and interrogate Mr. Chen like he's applying for a job at your company. This is my project, funded with my money, and I'll hire whoever I think is best qualified to do the work." "Your money?" Richard's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I wasn't aware that marriage had become a business partnership with separate accounting." "Maybe it should be," Victoria snapped, and Marcus realized he was witnessing the kind of marital argument that usually happened behind closed doors, the kind of raw honesty that revealed fault lines in relationships that appeared solid from the outside. Emma appeared in the doorway like a small ghost, her expression cycling between guilt and determination. "I'm sorry," she said, her 12-year-old voice suddenly sounding much younger. "I didn't think Dad would follow me here. I just wanted to make sure everything was going okay." Fluorescent lights humming over mismatched tables where amateur chess players gather to test their skills. Marcus Chen, a 34-year-old construction worker, sits across from 12-year-old Emma Whitmore, studying the board with the intense concentration of someone who has spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Marcus isn't just any construction worker. He's a widower, a single father to 8-year-old Lily, and a man who carries architectural dreams alongside the grief of losing his wife Sarah to cancer 2 years earlier. Chess has become his meditation, his way of channeling the analytical mind that once designed buildings into something manageable, something that helps him process loss while staying sharp for his daughter's sake. Emma Whitmore isn't just any 12-year-old chess prodigy. She's the daughter of Victoria Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, and Richard Whitmore, a corporate attorney whose marriage to Victoria has been slowly dying under the weight of routine, professional success, and emotional distance. Emma sees everything with the tactical precision of a chess master, including the quiet desperation in both her mother's eyes and Marcus's careful loneliness. The game that changes everything happens on an ordinary Thursday night, but Emma has been orchestrating this moment for weeks. She's studied Marcus's playing style, watched him improve through dedicated study of opening theory, and calculated the precise moment when he would be strong enough to pose a real challenge, but vulnerable enough to need encouragement. When Marcus achieves what appears to be an upset victory, capturing Emma's queen in a complex combination that leaves her king defenseless, Emma's response reveals the depth of her planning. Instead of disappointment, she grins with genuine delight and makes an offer that will reshape 4 lives. "You beat me fair and square, Mr. Chen. Now you have to meet my mom." Victoria Whitmore arrives at the community center expecting to collect her daughter, and instead finds herself face-to-face with a man who sees her as more than just a successful executive or someone's wife. Marcus Chen represents everything Victoria didn't know she was missing: genuine attention, intellectual curiosity, and the kind of presence that listens to understand rather than waiting for its turn to speak. When Victoria mentions her dream of restoring the abandoned Victorian mansion her company owns, Marcus's eyes light up not with dollar signs but with the genuine excitement of someone who understands the soul of old buildings. Unkai's, their first real conversation happens in that neglected mansion, where peeling wallpaper and water-damaged floors become the backdrop for 2 people discovering they share more than Emma's matchmaking scheme suggested. Victoria's business acumen combines beautifully with Marcus's hands-on expertise, creating the kind of collaboration that extends far beyond professional compatibility. But Emma's chess-playing precision extends to understanding human nature in ways that would impress Machiavelli. She's not just playing Cupid. She's conducting a careful analysis of 3 adults who have forgotten how to pursue happiness because they've become too focused on managing disappointment. Her father, Richard, drowning in work to avoid confronting his failing marriage. Her mother, Victoria, successful in every area except the one that matters most. And Marcus, so focused on being the father Lily deserves, that he's forgotten he deserves happiness too. The revelation of mutual attraction happens gradually, built on shared projects and conversations that reveal compatibility in ways that transcend the obvious obstacles. Victoria and Marcus discover they both approach problems with patience and attention to detail. They both believe in fighting for things that matter, even when the process is difficult. Most importantly, they both understand that love isn't something you fall into. It's something you build, brick by brick, with the same care you'd use to restore something precious that has been damaged by time and neglect. When Richard discovers his daughter's elaborate plot, his response is everything you'd expect from a man watching his marriage dissolve, while a stranger seems to represent everything he's failed to provide. The confrontation that follows is both heartbreaking and necessary, a family explosion that forces everyone to confront truths they've been carefully avoiding. Richard's accusations reveal his own pain and insecurity. "You're a construction worker, Mr. Chen. She's the CEO of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What exactly do you imagine you have in common besides Emma's romantic fantasies?" But Victoria's response cuts to the heart of why their marriage has been failing. "That I might remember what it feels like to have a conversation with someone who listens to what I'm actually saying. That I might discover there are men in the world who see me as more than just an acquisition that looks good at corporate events." This moment of brutal honesty forces everyone to acknowledge what Emma has seen all along: that love cannot survive on convenience and practical compatibility alone. Sometimes, the kindest thing two people can do is admit when the relationship they built no longer serves either of them, no matter how much history they share or how much they want to avoid disappointing their children. Emma's reaction to witnessing her parents' marriage end reveals the emotional sophistication that has been driving her matchmaking from the beginning. She's not devastated because she finally gets to see the adults in her life being honest about their feelings instead of pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Emma's parents don't become bitter enemies. They become two people who care enough about each other and their daughter to figure out how to co-parent successfully while pursuing their own paths to happiness. Marcus and Victoria's relationship develops with the same thoughtful patience they bring to architectural restoration. Their first official date leads to conversations about loss and hope, about the ways that previous relationships prepare us for new ones rather than disqualifying us from them. Marcus shares stories about Sarah with someone who understands that honoring the past is not the same as being trapped by it. Victoria explains how her marriage to Richard taught her the difference between partnership and parallel living. The restoration of the Victorian mansion becomes a metaphor for everything else they're building together. Each room brought back to life represents another layer of trust, another area where their collaboration creates something neither could achieve alone. Victoria discovers the deep satisfaction of seeing immediate results from physical work. Marcus finds his architectural dreams taken seriously by someone who has the resources and vision to make them reality. 18 months later, when the mansion renovation is complete, their relationship has developed into something that includes both their daughters, Richard's renewed commitment to active fatherhood, and the formation of Whitmore Chen Historical Restorations, a business that specializes in bringing forgotten buildings back to life. But Emma Whitmore has one more surprise in store. At the grand reopening of the Riverside Theater, their company's flagship restoration project, 17-year-old Emma reveals the final layer of her original strategy. She never expected Marcus to beat her at chess that first night. She had been deliberately losing games for weeks, waiting for him to study enough theory to provide a real challenge. I wanted to lose to someone who had earned the victory through effort, not to someone who just got lucky, she explains with the satisfaction of a grandmaster revealing a combination that has been years in the making. This revelation reframes everything that came before, showing that Emma's matchmaking was even more sophisticated than anyone realized. She didn't just create opportunities for her mother and Marcus to meet. She engineered a scenario where Marcus would experience the confidence that comes from genuine achievement, while Victoria would witness someone's dedication to improvement for its own sake. Emma's final chess lesson proves to be about more than tactical combinations or strategic planning. Sometimes the most elegant victories are the ones that look like everyone wins, because the person orchestrating them understands that the best games are collaborative rather than competitive. About love, loss, and the courage required to build new happiness after experiencing disappointment. Marcus's journey from widowed single father to man brave enough to love again shows how grief can coexist with hope when processed honestly rather than avoided. Victoria's evolution from unhappily married CEO to woman willing to fight for authentic connection demonstrates that success in one area of life doesn't automatically translate to fulfillment in others. Sometimes the most accomplished people are the ones who most need to remember that vulnerability and genuine intimacy require different skills than professional competence. Emma's role as matchmaker reveals how children often see possibilities that adults miss, not because they're naive, but because they haven't yet learned to be cynical about love's potential. Her chess-playing precision extends to understanding that the most beautiful patterns are the ones that take time to develop, that patience is a strategic choice rather than passive waiting. The story also handles blended family dynamics with remarkable sophistication, showing how divorce can sometimes strengthen family bonds when handled with maturity and genuine concern for everyone's well-being. Richard's transformation from absent workaholic to engaged father demonstrates that people can change when motivated by love rather than obligation. It becomes a language for understanding how relationships develop over time. Emma's chess lessons teach Marcus about seeing patterns where others see chaos, about thinking several moves ahead, about the difference between tactics and strategy. But the deeper chess lesson is about patience and positioning. The strongest players understand that some games cannot be won quickly, that the most decisive victories come from building small advantages over time rather than hoping for dramatic breakthroughs. Emma's matchmaking follows this principle, creating conditions where genuine connection can develop naturally rather than trying to force immediate romantic success. The chess metaphor extends to the restoration work that brings Marcus and Victoria together. Like chess, architectural restoration requires the ability to envision end results while focusing on immediate tasks, to balance respect for tradition with necessary innovation, to understand that some of the most important work happens in areas that aren't immediately visible. The Victorian mansion restoration becomes a perfect metaphor for how healthy relationships develop. Both require patience, attention to detail, respect for what came before, and the wisdom to know which elements should be preserved versus which need to be updated for contemporary needs. Marcus's professional expertise in reading building structures translates beautifully to understanding emotional foundations. He knows that you can't fix cosmetic problems when structural issues remain unaddressed, that the most important work often happens in areas that guests never see, that rushing the process leads to problems that become more expensive to fix later. Victoria's business acumen provides the resources and long-term vision necessary for ambitious projects, while her willingness to get her hands dirty during the restoration work shows Marcus that she's willing to invest effort as well as money in things that matter to her. As something that can be chosen and built rather than just inherited, Marcus, Victoria, Emma, Lily, and Richard don't represent a traditional family structure, but they create something that serves everyone's needs for connection, support, and belonging. Emma and Lily's friendship shows how children can form bonds that transcend the complications of adult relationships. Richard's evolution into an active co-parent demonstrates that divorce doesn't have to mean family destruction when approached with maturity and genuine care for children's well-being. The Thursday night chess gatherings evolve from community center meetings to family traditions held in the mansion's restored library, showing how shared interests can create continuity even as family structures change. This story teaches us that the best relationships are built like the best chess games and the most beautiful buildings, with patience, attention to detail, respect for what came before, and the courage to envision something better than what currently exists. Emma's matchmaking succeeds not because she manipulates people into inappropriate relationships, but because she recognizes genuine compatibility that fear and habit have prevented two people from seeing. Her strategic thinking extends to understanding that adults often need permission to pursue happiness, especially when previous experiences have taught them to be cautious about emotional risk. The story also demonstrates that love after loss looks different than first love, but it's no less valuable or transformative. Marcus's relationship with Victoria doesn't replace what he had with Sarah. It represents a different kind of love, built on different foundations, serving different needs while honoring what came before. Perhaps the story's most important message is about the importance of seeing possibilities where others see only problems. Emma sees potential happiness where her parents see only obligation and routine. Marcus sees architectural beauty where others see only decay and neglect. Victoria sees partnership potential where others might see only class differences and practical obstacles. The ability to recognize potential in buildings, in relationships, in people who have experienced disappointment becomes the story's central theme. Emma's chess-playing precision extends to understanding that some of the most beautiful combinations are the ones that take the longest to develop, that require patience and faith in eventual outcomes rather than immediate gratification. In an era when many people struggle with loneliness, when divorce rates remain high, when blended families are increasingly common, this story offers hope without naivete. It suggests that love can be found in unexpected places when people are brave enough to be honest about their complications, patient enough to build trust gradually, and wise enough to learn from previous experiences rather than being paralyzed by them. The story also celebrates the intelligence and emotional sophistication of children, showing how young people often understand adult needs and possibilities better than adults themselves. Emma's matchmaking succeeds because she combines tactical precision with genuine love for the adults in her life, creating opportunities for connection while respecting everyone's need to make their own choices. As the story ends with the grand opening of the restored theater, we see a family that nobody could have predicted but everyone deserves, built on honesty, maintained through mutual support, strengthened by shared challenges and collaborative victories. Emma Whitmore's chess lessons ultimately teach us that life's most important games are the ones where everyone can win when players are wise enough to collaborate rather than compete, patient enough to develop long-term strategies rather than seeking quick victories, and brave enough to believe that beautiful patterns are worth the time and effort required to create them. The story's final image: 5 people standing on a restored theater stage, their smiles reflecting the satisfaction of people who have learned that the best victories are achieved through collaboration rather than competition, serves as a perfect metaphor for what families can become when built with the same care and attention that transforms neglected buildings into architectural treasures. Marcus and Victoria's love story, orchestrated by a 12-year-old chess master who understood that some combinations are worth years of patient planning, reminds us that the most elegant solutions are often the ones that make everyone's position stronger, that the most beautiful victories are the ones that look like everybody wins. And Emma's final chess lesson, that some patterns repeat themselves across different boards, that some people need help seeing possibilities they're too scared to consider on their own, suggests that her matchmaking career may be just beginning, that there are other lonely adults in need of strategic intervention from someone who understands that love, like chess, rewards those who think ahead while remaining flexible enough to adapt. Emma's chess lessons remind us that love, like the best games, rewards patience and strategy. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring you more stories about finding hope in unexpected places. What's your favorite chess opening in the game of life? Let us know in the comments below.